So is it? Don't mind me now. I will just record it.
Never change that.
Look at this. Look for RR this thing.
You know the
but you know what?
try it.
But this one go up.
I want to check.
Try out then it will make it run out.
In the charge. Switch to sometimes.
The back camera with this. Oh,
Okay, yes.
you gotta allow me to set off flash. Extra light. Doesn't allow me to use flash. Okay. I think we're good to go. The captain well, have you?
The guy is sitting though.
Mm.
The guy is sitting. But I'm not sure if the captain someone standing.
You guys can also Okay, so without further ado, CG.
I just want to ask my test.
Huh? Guys, what's happening? Prime Minister, you won't get it. Yeah? Yes. What is smiling? So let's call upon the Prime Minister to start this debate. Yeah. You guys also have the time out to just in case you keep pushing it off.
So that's, I think it's important to recognize that individuals' ability to be able to access dignifying life is contingent on being able to access things like economic resources. We think it's important that the state is able to provide that for them. In instances whereby the state is not able to do this based on certain certain metrics that the state cannot be able to change. We think it is justified that we are able to reappropriate these like companies and have the incentive to do this. But even though the state has the desire to want to make individual lives better, in instances whereby the state is not able to, we think individuals should not be made to suffer for that and have to go through torture within a particular state or in a particular system. We think it is immoral, and that's why we stand for companies buying economically failing cities. What are rights? We think rights are in accessing a dignifying life, which means for you to be able to live the best quality of life, you need to be able to like access your rights now itself. What we tell you is that within economically failing cities, individuals are unable to access their rights. It's important to know this for key reasons. One is that the state is unable to provide them the individuals to be able to acquire many new skills for them to be states like utile to the state. But lastly, there is huge levels of inequality within the state. It means that even though you are able to approximate a certain degree of economic wealth, you're never going to be able to use this wealth to advance or progressive mechanism within that particular state. But lastly, because no option exists for you outside of the state that has short-term incentive, but also the state that has like a whole lot of like privatization and state has to do with lack of resources or lack of technocratic expertise. We think that in order for individuals to make their voices heard, or for individuals to be able to like claim the rights that they have, they need to be able to have access to that economic franchise. What we think like exists in the counterfactual for individuals that live within failed states. We think that one, like individuals flee the state over time. That's what exists, that people migrate away from this state. It means that even in their counterfactual, where the state is failing, individuals have no incentive to even access this right within that state. It means that like the rights that we want to post that we shouldn't buy are inaccessible for these individuals. Either way, it means that over time, the state is able to amass power and monopolize power within that particular state with zero levels of probability. Given that individuals migrate, we think that it is immoral on this premise, and it's for this reason that we stand in proposition. But also, we think that how does the state fail when they're inside the house? And that's why the counterfactual is saying, well, the state should work hand in hand with like multinational companies that are going to work. Because notice that in places like Nigeria, where you have like multinational companies living over time, that's what we characterize as economic like failure. We think that happens gradually, and it means that there is no incentive for these multinationals to return back to that particular state. Why? Because the state has actually pulled them out based on like states' inability to be able to approximate the correct policies. But we think on our own side is guaranteed is economic success. We are going to prove to you the mechanistics of this. I think we are going to win on the bench. Why? Because as soon as we are able to prove the mechanistics, any impact that we get out of closing government is likely going to stand on our material. We are happy to propose. But also, we think that there's a capitalist incentive that exists. I'll take it later. There's a capitalist incentive that exists on our side of the house. It means that even though capitalists are bad and terrible, we don't think that we live in like the 1800s, where capitalists of like colonialization was so terrible. We think that there exists active colors and active economic kind of like how individuals work or operate within a particular state towards like how you are able to access the market in and itself. So that's why Russia is banned, because they are bombing Ukraine. We don't think that capitalists are going to be extreme in our war. But also we think that why our war is so violent, because individuals can't choose. We think individuals cannot choose on the side of the house what the outcomes of their life look like. How do we like how by the virtue of implementation of our policy, individuals are able to choose. Notice exclusive. Now, our own side house, companies bid to buy. This is our policy. Like companies bid to buy this economically businesses. This is clearly important. Notice why this is important for key reasons. One is that there exists a direct competition stream between companies. It means that there's an incentive for you to be good, because if you are not good, you are kicked out. But also, I would think that this incentive is like primary superior, that individuals are able to make a choice. We think that on their own side of the house, individuals are locked in states that monopolize power. We think that they are not able to make a choice. The states actively able to lock out political parties, but also the state has no zero accountability for the military service to you, given that migration exists. It means that there is no incentive for the state to be good. We think that even though this is slavery, individuals consent to this by the virtue of the fact that you can say, because you want to access a good life, it is important that you trade off some certain grants. We think that this is primarily important, and it's for this justification that we should do this.
Point. Explain the rights that you're giving out. If you don't understand.
Oh, I think it's kind of intuitive. Given that one, you can like the land rights that individuals have many instances that are not utilized, you can likely sell your land, but also sell your estate. And like private companies building infrastructures anywhere they like without having to go through state bureaucratic tendencies. I think the motion is quite clear. Don't see why you stand on the mechanistic standpoint. Okay, I think it's fair at this point for like us to do this. So we don't have like investigating. Given that that's what these guys want to like stand on. We think that in many instances, like in current status quo, individuals have like lands for instance, and are not able to utilize land because they lack the resources to utilize land. But also, state has no incentive to utilize this land, given that like for the state to utilize land, it breaks you from like your economic slavery, and that harms the state. We think that the state has no incentive to do that on their own side of the house. We think on our own side, we are able to buy this land or capitalize by this land, utilization. We think that land is like a fundamental knowledge of how they're able to buy your right, because right to own property is a fundamental right of individuals. We think we're happy to trade this up. Let's engage our manufacturer. We think that if the manufacturers as well, each state should have like important options to be able to check this. It already exists in status quo. Why is the state not checking it? We think it's up and it doesn't work. We don't think we should like largely let individuals stand. We think even though they might claim that the state is likely to improve in the future, we don't want to like allow individuals suffer for this now, because we think that the approximation of one individual suffering now is a fundamental harm that we cannot repair even in the future. We think that even if one individual dies on their own premise, we think that's something that we stand against, and that's why we want capitalists to buy these cities. But also we think that the nature of various cities is that one, they're like lack of access to things like economic resources for individuals that exist, and important the social ladder, but also for technocratic expertise of the government. We think that these are like terrible things in themselves. Principal argument one, we think that there's a responsibility that the state has failed to fulfill. Why it's justified for us to take the right for states to own that particular like city in and of itself, or the right for states to exercise a specific form of authority. One, that states exercise neglect on individuals that are the most vulnerable within that state. We think that this primary premise of neglect means that you must take the right from that state. We think that why does this happen? In many instances, that these individuals are likely to be politically unstable, but also because of the short-term incentive that exists for government, also because of the lack of accountability against that. Nothing changes in their world, neglect still exists. But also we think that economic bureaucratization that exists within that particular state means that they are unable to get outcomes, given that the state has to check, like meet a whole lot of individuals before they are able to actively implement any policy. It means that on their own side, individuals are going to suffer, and the state is going to continue to fail, given a whole lot of bureaucracy that exists. But also we think that there are non-utilization of state resources, but also in many instances, utilization of state resources to help the most vulnerable people within that state. But also we think that it falls for them on responsibility of individuals to protect themselves and defend themselves from a state that doesn't care about them on their side of the house. Why do you think capitalists have an incentive to be good? Notice that if you are not good, you can't access the financial market in the status quo that we live in, because they have an incentive to be good. But also, like you all have like narrative around how you should explain people, how you should give people a fair wage. You think on our outside the house, if individuals are able to even access 70% of the basic income, it means that you can use that 70% to strive for more equality in the future. On the outside the house, this never happens for these reasons. We are happy to be close.
Our next thing,
Oh, no sharp though. I'm going to say no sharp though.
Alright, so
is it showing?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, you can move back a bit. You can push your stuff. I'm not so that the camera can get you.
Pressing the button.
That's it. How about
Just wait, man, you're not close anything.
Huh?
Negative mark.
Almost. I'm looking at the violation. And I'm not planning for it. Account to change. Sorry. I'm ready. Are you ready?
Yeah.
okay, so I'm starting to trade so funny. Chaos, capitalism, and the rise of human enterprise is created in one Cold War. So there became an apparent need to protect global poverty in the scope of today's debate, particularly because rights are something that signify man as PM within a time today's debate, right? So we think that basically to protect the dignification of rights in today's debate, a key clash now arises in what words can we best protect the dignity of man within the scope of today's debate, right? Understand basically what you get from PM. You get three basic arguments beyond some statements. Firstly, it tells you that principally that rights in themselves are like a means to access a better life because it's that fact, right? But we think that principally the idea to sell the economic rights to companies themselves, not give individuals like within particular public or business states to get their access to better rights. Why? Because capitalists themselves are incentivized for themselves, firstly, before for any other person, secondly, right? So no matter the incentive, no matter what you get like checks and balances, you can't like this capitalist drive to make money, always make money, right?
Yeah.
So even you have got a clash between profit making and the basic quality in this field space, we think these guys themselves will obviously prioritize making themselves better in particular points, right? Also understand that even like this model of C, they're going to bid for this, doesn't really solve the underlying problem because we think that all capitalists themselves are the same fundamentally at the end of the day, right? But secondly, right, it seems that state failure is the primary reason how to take away the power of government to like control their states as private individual. But understand something. When states fail, right, it's not primarily important to interrogate the positive factors of those failures. We think that basically political decisions themselves could be a positive factor of failures, right? What is means that people within the particular space can have the right to change governments in a particular point in time, and the team government themselves have failed to find basic amenities, like self-organizing between the poor people, economically failed states, right? Basically, people feel like whose decision should like be always prioritized, even though every argument that you get from government in today's debate. But to give it the arguments of self has an alternative. We think basically our arguments will clamp down on rights, political failure, and mechanization that we get these guys will. So firstly, on rights, we think that basically right, individuals consider or see some of their rights in government for like protection and like self-actualization within states. So when government feels like protect this particular levels of rights in particular property of state, government themselves should be called out and held responsible for those particular failures in themselves, right? Which means government accountability is something that we should prioritize in today's debate over selling off rights to like private that won't like these people at the end of the day. Because these guys themselves are usually marginalized in the scope of economically failed state. So government themselves should be called out, held responsible on particular points in like and we see the point of today's debate, right? So what it means that we can call out government, we can change government, and all benefits that these guys get, you can still get in the world, and the political structure itself is right, right? But also that's not the mechanization that these guys bring to you is very thin. As long as these rights are seated off, the private companies are like incentivized that make this case better and more. But here's the problem, right? Taking that person, governments themselves would always want to have a role in getting particular cities in themselves because government would think that even if cities become more economically viable, they can still get benefits from this. What is happening on the first level is that they put huge levels of taxation and regulation on these states. What this does that it destroys wealth creation and wealth production into the poor of this state, right? What happens in the situation, right? These companies always prioritize themselves. People are who what government puts between them. And if government control becomes so much, they pull out and how many any solvency for those field states like in the end of what these guys do to, right? Also that's a very key argument in today's debate, right? It is very vital to prioritize long-term benefits for a larger number of people above short-term benefits like what's going on, right? What these guys say, so to prevent the states or to prevent states from going into full amount of failure, sell them off, right? But to understand that this benefits only a few amount of people, keeping that usually poor people within poor of these states, suffer the effects of governmental failures, which are not their fault primarily, right? So when government fail, government should like, take responsibility for those failures, right? But also understand also that when you like prioritize short-term benefits, at the long run, you get a whole lot of like negative effects on that particular like, decision making that you take that you took in the first place, right? So we think that principally, even if people are going to suffer it now, which will consist from a set of the house, it is very important for us like always prioritize long-term benefits, which is states only like the basic elements of control over uncertainty that probably even the economically field in themselves are taking.
For this debate to make sense, up needs to concede that the mechanisms of changing the government or trying to self-repair mechanisms have already failed. But that's what you mean by failed economies.
Now the thing is, even if we concede to this argument, right, understand primarily that this debate happens also in the case where we assume that the citizens can have the right, they have decision on the right, like to make changes within their scope of leadership, right? So understand also that even in the Bible, there's an element of change even in our world. How big slow, but it's long lasting and sustainable, people to stand for from opposition, right? Understand also, right, and something that's very important in today's debate is that when state fails, it allows us like to put culpability on the primary actors of state failures, right? And that primary actor of state failures is the government. So the government still has responsibility. We can't put them culpable for filling the primary duties of social contracts, as citizens to get them the particular line. Right? So see that basically government themselves should be held accountable. But another alternative that exists in today's debate, which is if they think that at the end of the day, want to protect rights of citizens and organizations, right? It is principally this is opting for many other organizations to see that they are probably to get like all benefits with like still within state control, stuff like borrowing, stuff like devaluation, that can help you receive get a better amount of economically sound state within the public of the society. Right? So we think that alternatives exist, such as devaluation, such as borrowing, and you see all better mechanisms than this guys doing today's debate. Right? We think also that last panel, on the last argument that we give you, we think that also when we don't necessarily allow governments bail out private companies. Why? Because we understand like the need for this equation to exist within public private space, right? It is primarily important because governments should actually serve as a check and as a regulatory body, even when it comes to the rights of people within the environment. So when you take away this particular right of government and this private individuals, is that to allow these guys to run riots within the public of states, within the public of cities that are usually kind of marginalized people that needs governmental protection, which government feels in today's debate. Right? At the end of today's debate, the clash becomes if government feels, as we all agree, or as we open government organization as agree, what then becomes the best corrective mechanism to correct governmental failures? They say self-private individuals. We say first government accountable on the first level. First government to put better regulatory better policies in place like donation and growing in second level. And then they maintain governmental control. So people hold their government accountable and realize that they want to get on the consulting society. Today's debate, right? Let's get something clear. We start for people enjoying open and empty their states because they are born to be there from the
All right, thank you, Dr. Sokran. Speech, call upon Dr. Prime Minister.
Finally, pressure from CG. CG pressure, fear of CG. But I grab it. Okay. Please give me 1 second. Okay, I think it's important to understand that when we say a city or a state, even if it's a small state like not a country has failed, it means that it has been integrated to a point where sovereign government no longer function. The importance of this clarification in terms of definition, because I think this guy needed us to go back to definitions, is to understand that before we get to a point where we call an economy a failed economy, it means that internal checks, self-mechanisms or self-repair mechanisms have already equally collapsed. And at that point, you understand that the idea of sovereignty or the protection of the dignity of that state no longer exists. Why is that so? Because sovereignty is actually a phenomenon that is derived from the aggregation of the rights of the individuals within that state themselves. Sovereignty is not an abstract concept that exists. At the point when you therefore legitimize the rights of these individuals to the point where they can't access those rights, right? Ultimately, it means that you lose that sovereignty because you lose the ability to service the rights of those individuals at that point in time. So this means that the counterfactual actually, I will give them better counterfactual that engage anyway. The counterfactual of saying, let's vote the new government or whatever doesn't work, but I'm still going to engage that essentially. Notice that on their claim, because that's the only thing they talk about, that governments can be changed. 3 responses. One, like I already said, things must have already happened separately before the state itself gets to fail. Secondly, is that we think people must have lost faith in their states or in their governments. Because you must understand that we're dealing with rational voters here. Meaning ultimately that at the point when the state has failed irretrievably, there is no longer trust that exists in people, even in the electoral system in and of themselves. You must also understand that the reason why democracy works is because of gentleman agreement, what we call social contract theory. Nobody signs anything, but we actually believe that if I do vote in this young man, he's going to actually, in return, protect those rights that I do have. At the point when those rights have been perpetually violated, that agreement no longer exists. Thirdly, is that the dissolution of the state powers is also a form of accountability. Because see, when you say that accountability exists in democratic setting, it doesn't just mean that we're able to call out the state. It also means that we're able to dissolve the state in itself. That's why, for example, you're able to call back your senators or your parliamentarians or all of you're able to take away that mandate that you give them. Taking away that mandate and giving it in the hands of a private capital is also you calling out the state and holding them accountable. So your counterfactual is let's hold the state accountable. We're fucking doing that already. Anyways, let's move on into the things that this guy said. No, you have a tip here. Note that we think that rights exist as a means to an end. Because you need to come back to this debate and tell us why there exists any sort of intrinsic value of rights. If I possess a right, for example, to speak, if that exercise of that right does not in any way improve my life or is going to put my life in danger, I'm sure that's going to inform whether I want to do that or not. So if I know that speaking is going to lead me to taking a bullet to my head, I'm going to not exercise that right in that particular instant. Meaning that rights in and of themselves don't have any intrinsic moral value. Rights are used to better the lives of these individuals. In the event where their lives are already messed up because of a failed state of instance, it is okay for them to then use those rights to negotiate a better life for themselves. And that's what you simply do by trading those rights in those instances. You negotiate a better life for yourself, giving your rights. This is what you do with democracy, essentially. Because when you vote in the government, you are trading off your rights for that government to then return some other rights. So if you give up things like rights to land or property, or give up things like rights to privacy, so that these individuals can better optimize their products and sell their products to us, we think that it's okay for us because we are then ensuring the basic fundamental rights which is the right to life in and of itself. Because there is no right to life if you do not possess economic emancipation for you to be able to actually live like a dignified life in the particular instances. So right to life becomes paramount. If I can sell my right to property ownership or sell my right to privacy, that's okay because at the end of the day, I then benefit, in terms of being, not just a living entity, but also one with a dignified life. No, thank you. So let's talk about, the incentive for the state to not, for the actor, the capitalist to not be abusive, because that's what the contractor should do. So I'm going to engage the smarter side in CO, because that's what the debate should be about, how these guys are going to not act in the best interest of these individuals. A couple of arguments there. One is present day realities. You must understand that this debate is happening in the 21st century. Meaning that things like acts of like oppression of individuals is something that everybody already frowns upon. Meaning that, for example, as a private entity, you cannot necessarily just abrogate the rights of individuals to the extent of saying things like, forcing them to work when they're underage, for example, or forcing women to be raped by you simply because you are in control and all those sort of things. We don't think that we're able to go back to that extent of absence of right anymore. Which is the reason why this debate has to happen within a reasonable extent of right evaluation in this instance. Secondly, is that checks and balances exist because of the existence of other bigger powers in this instance. Note that a subtle can factually run is to say we can still borrow money, we can still invite other countries and all much more dangerous because in the event where they mess up, nobody can call them out. This is exactly the same way US exists in places like Eritrea and Ethiopia, etc. Being the good guy ultimately, but at the event where they start siphoning your resources, you are no longer able to call them out, and you don't have any bigger power to call them out. But if you have a private sector, for example, doing the same thing, because let's assume the private sector can go rogue. If you have a private sector doing the same thing, you have bigger powers, like the UN, like the US, whatever other bigger bodies that are going to call them out and then make them lose that relevance.
So in your world where the state is ridiculously shit, what exactly this company is going to do to salvage the condition and make it better?
Great. Which is my third point, right? We think that your ability to profit depends on the net happiness of the people. Why is this so? Because ultimately, you want to avoid backlashes from the people, knowing fully well that these individuals themselves have the ability to counteract on that individual. Meaning that the only way because like they say, it is a profit-making venture. The only way you make profit is if the people are happy enough to the extent where you are still able to continue to sustain your control over those individuals. This means that there exist heavy incentives to give the people at least basic amenities, but secondly, to give them wealth to the point where they're able to have purchasing power to purchase your products. Because as a business, you want to sell products, you want to sell services. You can't sell that to an impoverished bunch of individuals. Ultimately, there's a burden on you to make sure that they have the amount of money to become rich and buy the kind of things that you want to have at those particular prices, in those particular instances. But notice primarily or finally, right, that as an individual, as a private capitalist, right, who wants to make profit ultimately, that you want to continue to sustain that with money that you do have. But notice that there's always competition that exists, which is the framing that it gives you. Meaning that as a last check and balance, you are scared of the fact that another person can come and these guys are going to say, we no longer want Elon Musk, but we want the Bezos of our instances. We win from coaching.
Brian. Children. When it's not right. Oh, okay, right when you are.
But we have to understand what states are and what they do. The state is like the government and where the people voted these people in to do these things for them, and they actually hold them accountable for things that they do. And that's why we have to understand that capitalists will always prioritize themselves over the interest of the people. And you're talking about individuals getting that. Before they eventually get that, they get deprived of so many other things. And you say that, of course, they'll get deprived, and in the long run, if they are going to survive it or whatsoever it is. But we tell you that even in the long run, there are still effects of these things that are going to affect people negatively. And you saying that they are going to be able to get called at this non 90, whatever, doesn't really work out. I'm going to explain in my speech. So he talks about economic success in these situations where in their world where when they sell this right to these people. There's no assurance of economic success in this world. And they are not able to show us how it's actually going to work. You're talking about them selling their land rights for them that are going to invest, that's going to actually work. There's no assurance of success in their world. And selling these rights and then saying that these capitalists are going to get there's accountability and they're going to be able to there's accountability and they're also going to be able to they're also going to get they're going to get backlash from society and get backlash from people. Let's understand that when you sell this right to them, you say that they can do whatever whatever they want with the right. It's no longer mine, it's yours now. You can do whatever you want to do. And you coming back to come and say that okay, this is what you are doing is wrong and whatever it is. It's not going to really work because in the first place you're the one that put them there and you knew the effect of what you were doing in the first place before doing it. Yes.
See, on one hand, you can't argue that these guys are profit-making capitalists, right? And also argue that there's no incentive for them to fix the state. If they don't fix the state, they don't make profit, they fail.
Why can you say that? How can you say the capitalists are not profit-making capitalists? How? What do they do in the first place? You say that they don't make, okay, what do they do in the first place? What they prioritize is their profit and how they are going to improve their businesses and expand. They are not entirely talking about how the individuals are going to benefit from this. Okay, yes, they may get jobs and they may be able to live better lives. plans, when they want to improve the roads, or when they want to build companies and all that. But let's understand that when capitalists do these things, they are going to be only business minded. They don't really care what really happens, and they are going to expand as much as they can, even if it's going to affect individuals in that place. Let's understand that they are going to expand. It's also not assured that these capitalists they are not going to be extreme. And you come and tell us that they're not going to be extreme does not really work. And we also understand, let's just take example from Shell and where they already operate in PH and all the surface, all the pollution that are happening there. They give them something, okay, just take this one and rest, you'll be all right, or they will not even survive in the first place. So there's no way that you can say that these people are not going to still suffer from doing this thing. Yes,
Okay, I think I proved to you exactly why the state lacks the resources, even though they have the incentive to. Capitalists have the resources and incentive base. We get success outside.
There are other ways to go about it rather than giving them the rights. You can also let them to, maybe they can get 50% or rather than 100%. We're talking about this. They have still 100% of this right to do these things. But when you give them some laws and give them some regulations, be able to regulate however they use these lands, not entirely that they can take it or do whatever they want to do, whatever that is not going to affect the people at first, because they will not entirely prioritize the people. But the state is the what's the word now? It is the state has its own aims to prioritize the people, and that's why they were elected in the first place. So the capitalists don't entirely have the right to protect these people, and that's why we think that the government should actually watch and see how they check how they do these things and how they go about it. And you giving them the entire right is not going to help the government. And then the right to own properties and state neglect and economic bureaucracy and all that. Just to understand that there's going to be development in this state, and there's going to be better development and all that, and that's going to help the state to be better. And we also see that, okay, yes, these cities may entirely be failed they may have failed economically, but because there is not only capitalists that can actually help the states to improve, there are other ways that the states can actually improve. Yes.
If your alternative is 50-50, what exactly is the state going to do with that?
That's why we said that. The reason why we say that is because it's going to still help the individuals in one way or the other. It's not going to be, that's what we have been able to tell you, that capitalists always prioritize themselves. The other part of the 50 is just going to help the interest of the individuals. In situations where these capitalists those the interest of the individuals, that's why we think that they should not get yes, it says that the responsibilities of the sovereign government have entirely collapsed and there's no trust from these people. But let's understand that these people that voted them into the government in the first place, if they see that there's no trust from them, or they bring something that is going to be reasonable, rather than something that will take away mostly their lives or any form of thing like that, they are not going to appreciate whatsoever it is that comes to them. So you taking trust away, and talking about trust does not entirely work, because yes, they lose trust when they see that the economy has failed, but the trust can still be regained by the same state when the government does things that help the state to improve. Yes, and people will always need people on social contract. People will always need local government, and people always need the government in the first place. So there's no way that I can say that the people cannot, and happiness is hinged on the rights of people, and that's why we think that the government should not sell this right, because happiness is what's going to be taken away from these people when these capitalists come and do whatever dictatorship they want to do, or do any form of strict taking over of their lands and all that. And that's why, okay, that's state failure does not exist. State failure does not take away sovereignty. That's what we're going to say. That state failure does not take away sovereignty of the state. And if you're selling your sovereignty just so that the land is going to be better, or the government, the individuals are going to be better, then there's no state in the first place.
Pleasure.
I don't see your face like that.
You can turn to share, like sideways. Three people.
So, wait, hold on, just one minute. I cannot
pretty much before I start, right? This house will allow companies to work the rights to economically leading cities, right? I begin in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to do 2 things in this debate. Show you why cities fail. And the second thing I'll do is answer a question that was never answered in the opening now. Why will companies ensure that these cities are better off? Firstly, why do cities fail? Because of states' generic implementation of policies. So even in the most altruistic states, let's say the best scenario where the state is so great, right, at implementing or at doing great stuff. Oftentimes when they implement policies, it inadvertently affects cities. Example, Donald Trump, for instance, let's say even in America where states and cities are in some ways autonomous to an extent, if Donald Trump puts a tariff on China, it will affect farmers in like Kansas or all those kind of places, right? This happens in other countries too, where we see these kind of things happening, where political policies, which are oftentimes come from a generic sense in countries and states, inadvertently, even when those policies have good intentions, affect states. Oftentimes, because of the fact that they cannot necessarily measure like the full scope of effect of these policies down to those cities, that's exactly what causes this. Even when those policies affect like another city, I mean like a policy like tariff could affect like somewhere like California that their major output or export is tech, right? But it will affect a city whose exports like agriculture. And we think in contextualization, we will have companies that are like experts in these kind of areas, right? So cities have very different things that they trade in, or very different things that when they lose because of policy, they will become less viable and tend to fail. I think generic implementation affects that. Why would companies be different in terms like this? Because of the fact that they are able to focus more intensely on those cities, more specifically on the nuances and the needs that those cities need, like in terms of like what kind of thing is your main export? Is it agriculture? Is it concrete? Is it whatever it may be? They are going to be able to focus on that and to be as much as possible invest in that. Something that even the state or even that country may not be able to do holistically. We think that this is something that is actually already shows like the benefits that these guys ask for. But secondly, because of the fact that they can do more intensive research on those nuances, why would they be incentivized to do this? Because of the fact that they can see that there are different strengths the people within those places have, sit down, the specific strengths that people within those places have, and specific areas within those cities, but primarily because it's a smaller scope, meaning that it's easier for you to see those nuances. Companies, like even states sometimes will not be able to see this. So even if, let's say, like the city has a governor, for instance, he will not be able to see these nuances. Why is that? Second point, on political leanings. Oftentimes, like with the example I gave you of Donald Trump, oftentimes because politicians and states have certain political leanings that they have to adhere to, they make certain policies that will inadvertently affect the people. Oftentimes, like Donald Trump, for instance, with his relation with China, and certain cities that want to lower tax because they are liberals, they have this incentive or they have this belief that they have to continuously lean on those political leanings because that's the manifesto they ran on, that's the belief they ran on, that's why they were voted in the first place. They are like have this loyalty to this party, and they always, in most instances, have to follow the kind of leanings of these kind of parties. And we think oftentimes this inadvertently affects states because they do not care about the economics but about the politics. Why are companies different? Companies don't give two shits about politics unless it is economically viable to them. And we think in this kind of instance, when they focus more on how they are able to get profits, we think they are less likely to focus on like those political policies and those hard political leanings without like minding the kind of economic harms that it comes about. Answer the question of why companies are better. Before I do that, let me take open things on when we
Right. So the argument is based on the fact that politics still has a role to play in games, right? So show how you can ensure sustainability in your
basically what I'm trying to show, despite these injustices that may exist, even about except some political injustices may still exist, they can now find ways out despite that, right? There are so many ways to help. I'll show you that at the end of my speech. So many ways to help, like let's say a failing city, a company can focus entirely on how to get past that despite those political injustices. Why? What will companies do? This is something that we just asked. What will companies do? We think on rights and on people, and the people need to survive. Companies, these cities are not failed. They are failing, meaning there's still some sort of viability. What they ask is why would they want to invest in something that's failing? It's because there's still some element of viability. There's still some profits that can be made. And we think this is important. When companies can see that these people still have the possibility to live, there's still ability to actually make profits, we think that's very good. What would they then do?
they will then be able to realize these kind of advantages that cities have. Because most times states are so blind to see like what's the possibilities of people. Like for instance, the tech industry, right? There's so many possibilities within the tech industry in so many developing countries, but states can't see this. With companies, right? Because of how much they're interacting with like different companies and like the world, they're able to see these things. And what would they then do? Invest in them, because oftentimes you need to invest in the people by putting the first infrastructure, putting certain things within those cities that will incentivize them. So like a guy that is so smart and can code and all those particular things, right? People that have good business ideas need this kind of money to then be able to generate the kind of profits you need. So in our world, we have a situation where companies are focused on the people that sit down, in the sense that they want as much as possible enable, because they see a certain type of viability. They invest in that area, invest in those people that can build up this kind of places. So even if it's after agriculture, because companies are more incentivized to make mechanics, they can give money to like farmers to get like more mechanized tools that will help these agricultural sectors and all that. Let's accept our worst case scenario. Even if anything I said is silly, and companies are so evil, why would this wish to support this? Firstly, because in failing states, companies and all these capitalists will still try to control things from the background. When you bring them to the forefront, when you bring them to that light, there is more glaring accountability on them. Why is this important? This is important, and it's a lie that companies don't give a shit about public like view, because of course their influence doesn't just end in that city. Like all companies want to grow, right? So they care about what the public thinks about them. People can go call them out on Twitter about all these kind of things, like most times, right? So they give a shit about what the public thinks about them. When you put them in the public sphere, normally in like their world, companies will still be at the background, trying to get what kind of profits they want, being as evil as they claim them to be. But when you put them in that glaring, give them this right, and also because of the fact that they feel like their image to the people is something that is very necessary. What have we shown in this place? Firstly, the reasons why these things are even failing cities, because of the generic implementation of states and countries. Secondly, because of those political limits of certain leaders. And we've also told you what companies will do. How there is more, you're able to focus more intensively on specifics. And lastly, we've accepted the worst case scenario. Even if you don't buy anything else, we would still win on our side. Proud.
Would like to call upon member of I don't see the top of sheep, but I only go to think because they love me. Select the rice to come out from your face, because the rice are being prepared for soup. I love. Very good.
Thank you.
The problem we have in today's debate is because of government's inability to properly characterize what rights look like. Because characterizing what these rights look like will make us understand why companies will be able to massively engage in building cities themselves, right? So do they just look like companies just existing and being able to buy land without paying the state, or they look like companies fundamentally getting taxes from those particular regions? So with those taxes, they can do proper redistributions of things within those particular spaces.
their inability to show the amount of control companies make in itself, then becomes a problem with us understanding how they will be able to properly even implement all the policies they want to get, and you get those things in from my speech. So what we now get from all their speech is just the fact that all they have is the right to build companies. We'll show you why that premise, which is what their case looks like, is not still enough to create an economic change within these particular nations. If the government, and like first, this is an engagement to all the teams, right? If the government is so bad that they're not interested in the states, according to what ISIS says, right? Because it tries to make them look like a failed state or failed economies look like economies where the government are failed. It means one, the government is not even incentivized to give this particular rights to companies that are interested to build the states. Because the government doesn't have interest in the states, the government doesn't have interest in giving this right to companies interested in building the states. So there is no way you would now have companies who are interested in building the states, because you understand if you make the concessions that capitalists could be like people who own private companies should be problematic in terms of capitalism and not being interested in the state. Example is that would be like this man makes a shitload of money in Nigeria, but he's not interested about the growth of Nigeria, right? He owns all massive monopolies, he imports things in Nigeria without being checked by the customs, right? He makes a shitload of money, he doesn't care about the implementation of policies. It's the reason why the only cement we have in Nigeria is Dangote cement, right? That particular level of monopoly is not in the best interest of the Nigerian economy in itself, right? So basically in itself, right, those companies do not even care about those states in themselves. So those companies are the kind of companies that the government will use. Secondly, to Collins, right, if governments have political leanings, it means also that the last thing they will do is to sell economic rights to companies who are going to go against those particular political leanings in themselves, right? Because that means that they're going to be clashed by people within their political ideology. So the policy is still failed from a world and within a particular framework. But thirdly, is that failed economies are growing. Like there are failed economies like who have capitalists or companies who grow, who don't care about the happiness of the states. I've talked about Dangote. Secondly, panel. Economic failure is particularly an endemic within states. What it means is that in many cases, it doesn't mean 100% that the state is fundamentally failed or the government doesn't care about building the state. The example is a particular state like that goes into economic failure due to COVID, right? There's a small state with limited resources, and there's a particular world pandemic that causes those particular states. It's a failed economy at that point in time. It doesn't mean the government cannot fundamentally revive those particular states. So it means that economic failed states can still be revived because economic failure is a particular level of endemic, which means government can still be changed. It doesn't also mean the government is still fundamentally bad in that sense. But secondly, we think countries have failed economies because of many instances, and this takes away everything on how their policies work, right? They have failed economies because they're not able to implement the basic amenities that create incentives for companies to exist within those particular zones. Same thing with, right? Not even policies, good roads, which make companies who want to exist and just put their products within your companies, right? Like in other countries, but also things like education, which means that companies can fundamentally employ people within your state to exist, right? And grow without always exporting people. Things like security, which means that companies will want to exist within those particular zones. These are things the government doesn't give, and those are things that economic rights to those companies will not give. So the fact that giving them to economic rights still do not translate to companies wanting to exist within those regions and expand within those regions themselves. You need the government to be fundamentally accountable. It's not problematic because it take away economic accountability from the government. It means if security is the reason why economy should grow within those places, the government wouldn't want to implement policies that security within those particular regions themselves. This is why the policy still doesn't fundamentally work. But secondly, to revive a failed economy, you need to and this is particular to companies, you need to massively push in money into those spaces and expect no returns for a long period of time. That's how you revive economies. You need to put in money into roads, right, which you're not getting return for a long period of time. Money into education, which you're not getting return for a long period of time because education will most likely be free and all those kind of things, right? You need to put money into government-owned institutions where people are going to get services for almost free or for a limited amount, and people still get a reasonable amount of salaries, right? So then, how is it that economic rights then translate to him creating those massive economic change that still create those help those economies? Because eventually the state's able to do this one because their ability to get things like loans and grants, which I think they will fundamentally get in many instances, because we can show how your policy would eventually create change. People will give you those loans and grants. Those are usually the reasons why people get grants within those spaces. But the companies cannot get those things, right? Because they're not bodies that directly give loans to companies, right? But these companies always need to have reserves within themselves because they don't want to fail. companies also need to get fundamental income because they don't want to fail. So the last thing they'll do is do any form of alternative thing that doesn't give them any form of fundamental benefit within that particular space. That level of failure is there. But also, if you understand that companies have fundamental harms in themselves, right? These companies, like I've shown you, have shoes. Okay.
So in status quo, these companies are not going to come in because, like you say, it is the job of the state to provide those resources. That's the reason why the incentive is for them to get the right so that they can make those long-term investments and benefit from it.
How do they make those long-term investments? They don't tell us where they get those fucking resources from. They don't tell them why they have incentive in those spaces to make those long-term investments in themselves. And also explain how companies can still strive. Like Dangote is thriving. Otedola is thriving in a poor economy. He doesn't care about fundamentally reaching out and pushing out. When you remove operability from the government, you engage things like gentrification within those regions, right? Things like gentrification, when the only companies are interested in is creating or going to places where people are rich and where people can necessarily buy a particular product, right? Increasing the amount of money you spend on the standard of living, while there is no fundamental increase in the amount of income that goes into the pocket of these particular individuals within those spaces, right? The things like bill of corporations ensure that companies are not being checked by individuals when they commit these massive excesses. Because bill of corporation means you cannot necessarily hold these companies or these individuals accountable within those spaces themselves. When you take away this fundamental aspect of accountability, it means you don't create necessary change. But lastly, is the fact that economic rights are owned by individuals, right? And those things are accessed by states in themselves, are not owned by states. You just have no right to sell rights that just without giving them to access by those particular individuals in those places. Read from zero.
Let's call upon the government. And then the video recording going on. She just come to see. I'm not letting you do that.
No, I didn't want to move the my chair.
Just so that
You're right there. First, you already here?
Yeah.
Closing comments is clearly acting to to prove why this problem is useful, like police clearly explains to you. But quickly, let's take closing operation out. The reason why closing operation is out of this debate is because there are cases weighed too heavily on semantics such that they become incontextual. The very thing they say is that, this debate lacks clarity about rights. I think that's semantics. I think that ultimately the kind of right of these people to this company such that they exercise control over fiscal policies, particularly to the thing. This exercise could come in several ways. It could come in decision, it could come in direct control, it could come in regulation, it could come in several ways, right? I think that's something big. But the next ridiculous thing they say is that there's no incentive of competition to this because we trust is really. And when and they can't get it. I think the very first assumption that they make that is really flawed is the assumption that these companies have to be internal. You know that these these investments will come from several states. And you don't think that these companies necessarily have to be within that state, right? That they become insofar as they have to be. You know that companies generally have a lot of incentives to do this. You don't think that the only reason why companies invest in areas is because of short-term benefits. You think that they also consider long-term benefits. But more importantly, like when they see that those resources have the capability to reduce profit in the long run, that's the right for them to do this guys. But the next thing they say is that there's no government incentive to do this. This is a contextual because I think the general assumption throughout the entire is that we're concerned about the best way of solving economic disparity. It's ridiculous for you to say the government has incentive to do this. The access where Collins clearly explains to you in how this is going to solve economic disparity, particularly when government has no sole purpose or government actions have been to the detriment of citizens, especially in terms of economic inequality. We're very, very proud of being Nigerian. Even the example about all the examples are literally staples. Like they needed to be very clear that can talk down for education, which they don't do. The next thing they say is that they aren't going to sell against companies who go against their principal limits. First of all, first clarification, companies do not have principal limits. Like Collins clearly explains, like the major reason that's why like they venture into business because they're looking for avenues to make profit. That's already enough reason as to why they're hard. Other ideas in accountability. Just before I go into clearly what Collins is doing, let's look at all the other benches more than clear session. The first idea of open government, I think the open government does a very good job of talking about rights, particularly on human dignity and trust about social welfare. But the gap in their case, which is filled by Collins, is clearly the root cause of this problem, which has been clearly explained to you, is the blank generalization that comes with government policy as to how they aren't conscious of the worst of the use. So that's the first of all, that they're unconsciously doing so. So secondly, I don't think they do enough to show how this capital is going to achieve change. Like that mechanization. Moving to open opposition, I think that the problem with open opposition, the biggest thing that we have is capitalist drive and profit making and how they prioritize themselves. So all of my material for research is going to be responsible. First of all, we think that these companies, what we're vital on our side of the house is that these companies holistically develop a center for economic disparities. The incentive for them to do this is profit both from revival of these areas and sustenance. Very, very important question. What does revival of these areas look like? We think that revival looks like setting up industries in these areas. It looks like providing basic infrastructure like roads, like water, like electricity. It looks like creating jobs to these local individuals to work within those industries. But what does sustenance also look like? Sustenance also looks like making sure that your employees still want to be working in these industries. That's like you do that by guaranteeing things like good pay, like guaranteeing good working conditions. Because ultimately, you don't want to have the hassle of responding to trade unions. You don't want to have the hassle of going to court. Clearly, what Collins explains to you about how these companies are very conscious about their image, and in order for them to protect their image, not for them to make sure they don't end up with like settlements, like courts, like hassles of trade unions and labor unions and labor markets. They're more inspired to do. But secondly, we think that sustenance also looks like preserving these basic infrastructure within these areas, which of course are accessible to people, which in order to keep the industries functioning. That's already enough incentive as why our world works for clearing up the economic disparity within these areas. That answers the first question on like capital interest and profit making. So regardless, we think that the act of profit making and benefiting these areas is mutually exclusive. So in trying to engender profit, you're also benefiting these areas. The next thing they say is that political change are the root cause of efficiency. That was a very good position. Because what Collins is how state has a generic responsibility to all citizens. They are supposed to be impartial. Because of that generic responsibility, it means that the loyalty to all the citizens makes you blind to nuances within it. And that's also very, very harmful for this area. Something that these guys totally do not imagine. What it then means is that you don't give as much attention as you possibly should to the So what that means is that in the kind of generic policy that state makes, what benefits one state might not benefit another state. Right. And that's problematic for people. Constantly explains to you how companies have no incentive to be political. So in that company advice to look at those nuances, interrogate them and think why, like whatever policy or whatever regulation or control they're accessing over those areas are completely beneficial to this guy. But the lesson you need to know is that oftentimes the state engenders economic disparity unknowingly, even with the best of education. That's what we always do. Because even in the best scenario, where the state is a very good actor, you might unconsciously end up engendering disparity in other states because that only benefits of the state to disadvantage of other states. That's ultimately why the state is problematic. What's not option?
Yeah, so if we can show that it is possible for companies to make a share of money while leaving the people who are the stakeholders in this space in horrible conditions, then how
What
would
these
the
guys are
government
most likely going to say is that, I get it, they get it, trust me. Companies might do these things, like they might exploit people in their areas, they might like those kind of actions. I've already showed you critically how the process of revival and sustenance ultimately means that there are trade benefits or like there are trickle-down benefits to these areas. So those trickle-down benefits look like providing this for because ultimately, if you're creating industries, you need employees to work in those industries. If you're creating industries, you need good roads, you need life, all those things, right? But more importantly, like if you're looking for control, this is very, very important because I think everybody can concede that this is a major cause of concern to industries. If you're looking for control, you're going to make that area that your industries are residing look very very well organized. That's the more reason as to why you have to make sure that the people within those areas do not actively resent you. You have to make sure that your actions are in their best interest. And before they resent you, you're never going to have all of the things that you want long term. That's very, very important. Why do we use this? The first thing we told you is how is the root problem and how the state and gain that is taking on. But secondly, culture already proves to your accountability as to how to get better accountability at the point where companies become at the forefront of the policy and their actions are very, very transparent. We're very, very proud.
I would try.
Yes, yes.
Still straight.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I want to waste time.
Feedback will come after 1 hour. I have a work report to take minutes after.
You see now. Are you ready? Are you ready? So, Father, I feel like the entirety of Noble's speech was fancy, but a very irrelevant, bogus principle of how capitalism would automatically be the savior of cities, right? Because government has failed. So, why they wasted time trying to draw link analysis of how government failure automatically warrants inclusion of capitalism? It is just on the presumption that this alternative is proposed by the motion. So, outside the fact that the motion proposes an alternative, there's a very lazy, completely unproved analysis of how these companies participate in the process of trying to reform regulations in the first instance. Because we do not disagree that oftentimes bad government policies are contributing of what leads to bad economic states. But here it shows you that those are almost in all instances not the only factors that also government has responsibility to check in the first instance, right? So the fact that there is need for solutions does not automatically justify that as an alternative. We think that was a very lazy argumentation in the first instances which they showed. This means the impact of why these capitalist companies taking over cities, which they didn't even characterize the extent or the form of economic crisis and how the kind of power it gives them, completely means that their case is not in this debate. Because the question I was asking myself is, right, if your main goal is to make the state economically better, then what are these companies going to do? And I asked him the and he completely did not answer that. He was just going all over what I didn't know. What that means is this, right? They want to recognize that one, it is entirely possible for companies to make a shit ton of money while leaving the stakeholders who are citizens in shambles. Perfect example is Singapore and Seoul. You can see massive skyscrapers and buildings, but due to the fact that the average income of an individual does not increase exponentially as the cost of living increases. Because companies' interest to make profit is when they produce commodities, right? They try to make as much profit as possible from it. Now, when you give them economic capital or power of the state, it means they cannot expand their power and influence. So, for example, Calabar now becomes a shipping mall where big shipyards are built. Automatically, small ships can no longer afford to pay the cost of capping their ships or docking them. So they now have to go for less substantial ships in other areas, right? So there's a slow growth gentrification process that exists. Why it is very likely? Because their case told you that the government is incapable and unwilling to be able to create functional policies to help the society, which means without the government existing as a strong army body to do the things that United States governments do by saying, oh, you must pay, they're going to make companies and shut you down. It means companies go at large, even if they are benevolent to a fault, like CG proposes, right? It means the incentives for them to use massive gentrification effects, right, to turn this system to mega structures for the rich is existent. And why is it going to be helpful for the local populations, right? Massive influx of population, people from other areas, like people who are looking for big opportunities, few cities, chasing out the original occupants of these individuals to very menial jobs. That is the reason why if you go to Dubai, majority of indigenous guys work at the lowest echelon of jobs like caterers, bakers. Why big offices are occupied by foreign dignitaries and foreign expatriates? Because those cities have been turned into havens for the region. The impact of this means then is that, right, where we can trust companies to make profits, right? The profits can come, but at the cost of the instance of development of individuals, which means how does the stakeholders benefit? They don't show how the interest of the companies will automatically translate into an economic completeness. Why? It starts at the grassroots. If the disposable income of an average citizen can increase, consumerism can increase, thereby increasing the product of small companies, which leads to spring up effects that leads to massive economic boom. But in a situation where you have the world, you have Nigeria that claims to be the richest country in Africa, yet the rate of population is below the economic line. We think that is very, very terrible. Just as we think that case last context. Let's take that. CG says that government policies are the major cause of economic failure, and there's a huge propensity of failure. We think it's uncooperative. We think companies are equally capable of making very terrible economic decisions. For example, 2000 crisis, where General Capital Management, which controls over $1 trillion, made very unreasonable financial decisions that led to crash of stocks and massive influence of very huge leverages, right? We think that doing things like risky financial decisions, right, is a moral hazard that can exist. Why? When companies are so leveraged, right, they are more likely to make such decisions, which means the propensity of bad economic decisions exists on both sides. We don't think that is comparatively unclear or completely unexistent to one side. But then let's assume, and work in their context, that it is possible that these companies really care about profits and they will make efforts. Why is this still that our company is bad? One, Chinedu tells you that the existence of political elites, and these guys are ridiculous to say companies have political elites. There's a reason why big Texas oil companies lobby Republican politicians because those policies influence their capital management in those states. The impact of that is only companies that would at least benefit the government and will not disparage on the already existing bad government political power would be giving such economic power. So what you do is this: you create a checkbook that states can sell cities and large amounts away for them to pocket. And the fact that this government is not this corruption will eventually swallow its money. Buhari would cash out by selling Calabar, Lagos, and Eco Atlantic. The impact of this means the background view of influence that they said that companies have in our counterfactual is equally as worse or even worse on their side because it is not very clear and people cannot do anything. Why? When you give companies such overwhelming political and economic capital, it is very hard for people living in economic failed state to be able to access political processes of accountability. So your conversation on Twitter doesn't affect United Motors or General Capital Management or Uber if they decide to turn your city into a haven where you have to be paid less than $50 a day and your government is too lazy about enforcing things like economic laws or policies that will make life better. The impact of that is this. Maybe a very good debater can debate this situation on one. But based on the extent of argumentation you got from these guys, they did not justify their claims. Okay, understand that all of the analogies they give for their case are status quo, which means that it doesn't happen. But understand clearly why we win this debate because the mechanism that we create means that you can check these companies out anytime they fuck up. It's a lie. You cannot just do that because if government is handing over economic rights to these companies, right? It means both of them exist in a cooperative mutual agreement. If we take your context, ridiculously failing. What are then the incentives for them to police them to the extent of that high level of efficiency? Especially when historically we have seen that companies like United Motors, large S&P 500 companies, would obviously do things that maybe would transform the city to a mega structure. But most of the people live below economic line and in very bad conditions because it is only few people that can afford those kind of standards of living. So the critical objective is this: why you can have at best case scenario mega structures built, they only serve the benefit of the rich and elite class. So when you're going to do these two things. Stakeholders analysis. One, you increase the gap between the rich and the poor by increasing their power and the mechanisms through which they can expand their capital influence on societies. This more entrench the already existing capitalist problem that we see in our societies. That means they will not ask us what makes your world better. The principle of non-conformity suggests that when you're having a conversation on big economic policies, any solution you propose has to be functional. If it's not, status quo is not preferable. Because you cannot say that, because the problem exists, right? Let us propose a horrible solution and then force us to provide a counterfactual. It is better to not do anything than to do a horrific suicidal policy that does not affect missions.
Guys, please don't go far. I'm waiting for you to come back. You don't go far. Like, just
Come
come
on,
back.
okay.
No, waiting for 5 minutes.
Let me